The Third Reich fell. Its chemical machines survived. The laboratories did not burn in the ruins. The formulas did not vanish. They simply changed owners. The United States and the Soviet Union divided the pharmacological spoils of a defeated empire. Ethics died. The science remained. In 1945, military intelligence launched Operation Paperclip. American officers sat across from captured Nazi doctors. They pushed employment contracts across cold wooden tables. Former regime scientists signed their names beneath the American flag. A heavy rubber stamp hit the dossier cover with a dull thud. Classified. Just years earlier, these exact researchers had weaponized amphetamines to fuel the machinery of a continental genocide. They had engineered synthetic stimulants to eliminate human hesitation and accelerate mass murder. Now, their past simply ceased to exist. Over 1,600 German specialists crossed the ocean. Washington needed their medical breakthroughs. Cold War geopolitics demanded immediate strategic dominance. The architects of wartime stimulants walked directly into classified government laboratories. Their frontline research built the hidden foundation for modern military pharmacology. Former Nazi doctors officially integrated into the earliest American aerospace programs. Chemical formulas extracted from the fallen Reich found a second life on the American market of the 1950s. How did a military stimulant end up in civilian pharmacies? Pharmaceutical companies simply repackaged the core concept under a new brand. The contrast was absolute. Magazines aggressively advertised pills created for continuous frontline killing as a harmless domestic weight loss aid. The substance quickly flooded the commercial sector. It hit the shelves under the name Obitrol. Millions bought it. For daily energy, for strict diet control. Buyers needed no prescriptions initially. Civilian consumption skyrocketed across the country, but the biochemical reality eventually caught up with the free market. Later, mass dependency cases among the population forced the FDA to drastically tighten federal control over these specific stimulants. The former blitzkrieg fuel had triggered a silent domestic crisis. The industry immediately adapted to the new restrictive rules. The brand identity shifted. Obitrol eventually transformed into Adderall. The core mechanism stayed intact: amphetamine-based cognitive stimulation. Direct commercial continuity permanently linked the ruined trenches of Europe to modern civilian medicine shells. The underlying concept survived the total collapse of the regime that first weaponized it. Chemists altered the chemical formula for legal sale. Generals analyzed front lines. The dry rustle of unfolding military maps echoed over command tables. But the core of the regime's system was not the chemical composition of amphetamines. It was a state doctrine of total annihilation. Methamphetamine merely fueled a machine already built for genocide. Deep inside government chancelleries, heavy typewriters clicked relentlessly, stamping out endless deportation orders to the camps. Bureaucrats drafted racial laws with sober minds. Chemistry did not engineer the hatred that triggered World War II. It only accelerated the logistics of slaughter. Ideology demanded absolute control. Drugs simply erased the physical limits of the executioners. The state weaponized pharmacology to conquer continents. Trains rolled east. Millions perished while the bureaucracy operated on artificial overdrive. But a collapsing regime cannot run on stimulants forever. The military machine broke apart. The death camps stopped operating. The doctrine of absolute control dragged its architect into a concrete tomb. By early 1945, the state machinery mirrored the rotting body of its creator. Why did the leader of the nation stop attending military meetings? Paranoia and physical exhaustion severed his ties with the generals. He locked himself underground. He surrounded himself with sycophants. The empire shrank to the size of a few subterranean rooms. Theodore Morel prepared the needle. He drew the chemical cocktail into a glass syringe. He pierced the dictator's pale, sweating arm. For one brief second, the spine straightened. The delusion of power returned. The unventilated bunker smelled heavily of damp concrete and stale medications. 15 meters of earth buried the Central Command. 3 meters of reinforced concrete blocked out the reality of a burning capital. The High Command went completely blind. His body broke down. Rotting teeth, chronic stomach spasms, constant tremors. He moved phantom armies across useless maps. Soviet artillery shells were already shattering the streets less than a mile away. The entire bureaucratic apparatus paralyzed. A nation at war requires rapid decisions. A shaking, paranoid dictator gave none. He trusted absolutely no one. He trusted only Morel. The doctor administered the daily injections until the very end. On April 30th, 1945, the commander-in-chief committed suicide. The leader's isolation in the spring of 1945 was just the final symptom of a dying state. The true collapse of the High Command had already paralyzed Berlin in late 1944. Allied bombs wiped out 40% of German industrial production. Trains stopped running, pharmaceutical factories burned, the empire lost its physical resources. Top officials consumed massive amounts of narcotics to ignore the collapsing fronts. The government functioned inside a chemical delusion. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels kept demanding total war from the bunker. A bottle of heavy sleeping pills sat directly on his desk. He drafted victorious public speeches while methodically preparing to execute his own wife and children. Facts ceased to exist. The disconnect from reality became absolute. The terror network mirrored this exact breakdown. Heinrich Himmler swallowed extreme doses of stimulants just to keep his collapsing departments responsive. Constant drug use destroyed his nervous system. Subordinates ignored insane orders. Ministries fought each other for basic survival. High-ranking bureaucrats packed forged documents and secretly fled the besieged capital under the cover of darkness. The bureaucratic collapse was only a symptom. The real systemic breakdown of state management began back in 1944, when severe chemical side effects crippled the commander-in-chief. What made the High Command believe in victory with collapsed fronts? Chemical stimulation had completely distorted their perception of the strategic picture. The medical bay of the headquarters reeked. A sharp scent of iodine and chemical solvents hung in the air. Here, a needle dictated the geopolitical fate of Germany. His physical deterioration became impossible to hide. Propaganda footage accidentally captured the violently shaking left hand tucked behind his back, the frozen posture, the erratic, rapid-fire speech. The daily cocktail of the dictator consisted of more than 70 different drugs and injections. This neurotoxic overload shattered his nervous system. Moods violently swung from euphoric confidence to paranoid rage. He accused loyal generals of treason. He dismissed crucial intelligence reports from the collapsing fronts. A chemically depleted mind now steered the entire war machine. Allied forces advanced, German industry shattered. Yet the bunker demanded massive counteroffensives. The state staked its absolute survival on miracle weapons, the Wunderwaffe. They waited for technological salvations that barely existed. The strategic map no longer reflected the physical world. He moved phantom divisions on paper. The Führer's decaying body survived on continuous chemical injections. His personal physician set the rhythm for the madness of the entire military elite. How did the decision-making center of the Third Reich function? Through daily intravenous narcotics. Theodor Morel opened his heavy leather bag. Glass ampoules clinked inside. He snapped the brittle glass necks. He drew a dense liquid into the syringe. The needle pierced the leader's arm. Routine procedure, total dependence. Morel acted less like a doctor and more like a state cartel boss. He supplied the geopolitical brain of the regime with constant stimulation. Between 1941 and 1945, the chemical reliance became absolute. 80 different drugs flooded a single leader's veins during the war. The daily protocol included Pervitin. Heavy methamphetamines kept the dictator artificially energized. But the foundation of his reality rested on something much stronger. Morel introduced Eucadol. The Supreme Commander dictated catastrophic strategic decisions on the Eastern Front under the heavy influence of this specific narcotic. Eucadol hit the central nervous system twice as hard as pure morphine. The man steering millions of soldiers operated in a severe pharmacological psychosis. Reality dissolved. To counter the physical exhaustion, his medical team resorted to extreme biological experiments. The official medical logs documented regular injections of bull semen extract. The identical chemicals saturating the Supreme Commander's blood were tearing apart his elite security apparatus. By 1943, administrative discipline inside the SS had completely collapsed. A guard stood over an inmate. His hands shook violently. He struck the man with bare fists. Saliva foamed at the corners of the officer's mouth. A pure hallucinogenic breakdown. This was not an isolated crack in the system. At Majdanek, another guard opened fire on random prisoners. He claimed they were whispering inside his skull, but the yard was utterly silent. The methamphetamine was pulling the trigger. Discipline terror mutated into administrative chaos. The state machine required cold, calculated extermination protocols to function efficiently. But instead, heavily armed units were plunging into collective mass psychosis. This systemic threat forced the leadership to initiate internal investigations against their own elites. Reich Health leader Leo Conti had long warned the regime about the methamphetamine epidemic. Now the crisis was institutional. Secret dossiers flooded the desks of the Nazi High Command. The reports labeled SS officers unstable, unpredictable, clinically insane. The violence no longer served state logistics. Executions became wild, personal spasms of chemical rage. The leadership finally drafted directives to restrict the stimulant, but the addiction was absolute. The ban arrived too late. Command efforts to standardize frontline dosages relied on fresh medical data. Dr. Karl Klauberg and Dr. Edward Wirtz harvested this data directly from living subjects. Where did the state machine search for the absolute limits of human endurance? The answer required expendable flesh. The protocols were strictly mechanical. Orderlies strapped starving prisoners to examination tables. They injected high-dose methamphetamine straight into their veins. Next, guards forced the subjects into vats of ice water, chilled to exactly 4 degrees Celsius. The sterile scent of carbolic acid in the laboratory completely masked the smell of unwashed bodies. The drugs forced the nervous system to stay awake, to violently shiver. To fight the freezing temperatures meant to simulate downed Luftwaffe pilots in the North Sea. An assistant stood over the vat with a stopwatch. He recorded the exact minute of clinical death on a stamped state form. Other subjects faced forced starvation. Doctors pumped them full of stimulants. They measured how long a human engine could run on pure chemical fuel. Auschwitz, Dachau, and Sachsenhausen operated as massive state military laboratories. People became mere biological material to test the endurance limits of the regime. It was a closed bureaucratic loop. The medical survival data extracted from Dachau directly shaped the official chemical ration standards for regular troops fighting on the front lines. The pharmacological strain tore the heart muscles apart. Every prisoner subjected to the extreme exposure protocols died on the examination table. The dead subjects provided the data. The data built a new standard. Methods refined behind barbed wire gave the regime exactly what it needed: a perfect pharmacological profile for the Schutzstaffel, the SS. This was no ordinary military branch. The SS formed the absolute core of the state death machine. They operated the vast extermination grid: Auschwitz, Treblinka, Majdanek. But running an industrial slaughterhouse demanded more than blind loyalty. Routine executions destroy the human psyche. The bureaucracy needed a failsafe. They found it in a lethal chemical blend, a targeted cocktail of stimulants and morphine. Methamphetamine provided absolute focus and relentless aggression. Morphine completely blocked all emotional reactions. This mix was no accident. The government used pharmacology as a deliberate tool to surgically remove empathy from its executioners. Cruelty transformed into a chemically constructed norm. To ensure the extermination grid never halted, medical officers officially prescribed the narcotic cocktail to keep the death squads strictly cold-blooded. The drive to chemically freeze human emotion was not born in a vacuum. By late 1940, the regular army faced absolute physiological bankruptcy. What happens when an entire division simultaneously loses its artificial stimulation? The crash was brutal. Entire platoons collapsed into the mud, completely drained of all physical reserves. Soldiers dropped mid-stride. Paranoia seized the survivors. Men shook violently. They screamed at empty forests. They opened fire on invisible enemies. Frontline commanders had to pull whole squads out of active combat zones. The enemy did not stop them. The chemical high simply snapped. Military doctors tracked the fallout. By the end of 1940, their urgent reports flooded headquarters. Rampant addiction, widespread psychosis, complete emotional disintegration. The central nervous system of the Wehrmacht was tearing itself apart. This systemic collapse forced a dark evolution. These mass physiological breakdowns of 1940 would soon drive the state leadership to seek even heavier, more radical chemical cocktails for their elite units later in the war. But the regular infantry could not stop. Headquarters buried the medical warnings. To maintain the offensive momentum, the new official regulation locked in the daily combat ration at exactly 2 Pervitin tablets. That physiological collapse was the hidden toll for a geopolitical earthquake. 80 kilometers, 2 days, 0 sleep. May 1940. The Ardennes Forest. How did an army break the laws of physiology? The answer lay in the map cases of German officers. French military command classified this dense woodland as an impenetrable fortress. They considered it physically impossible for heavy armor to cross. Paris trusted geography, but a chemically engineered pace completely shattered that defensive doctrine. The Wehrmacht weaponized insomnia to bypass the French strategy entirely. Dawn broke through the canopy. The muffled roar of hundreds of tank engines vibrated relentlessly through the dark timber. A panzer commander stood before his lined-up drivers for the morning briefing. He opened a tin tube. He dropped exactly 2 Pervitin tablets into every outstretched palm. The state dictated a new, artificial standard for human endurance. General Heinz Guderian drove his armored spearhead straight toward the Meuse River at Sedan. The Wehrmacht simply swallowed the terrain. France fell rapidly because the invading force temporarily erased the biological need for rest. This sudden collapse of Western Europe was the direct climax of a reckless military strategy forged in Berlin laboratories years earlier. Engines idled just outside the French defensive lines. Officers walked down the infantry ranks and handed out additional doses of the stimulant before the assault. Breaching the Ardennes in mere days relied exclusively on the Blitzkrieg doctrine, lightning war. The state required absolute, unbroken speed. A standard 8-hour sleep cycle gave the defending armies crucial time to regroup, dig new trenches, and pull up strategic reserves. The military command simply erased rest from the logistical chain. Blitzkrieg demanded a continuously operating human machine. The assault mechanism synchronized the sky and the ground. Luftwaffe bomber crews flew deep into foreign airspace, 8 to 10 hours in the cockpit, dropping payloads, returning to base, launching again. Beneath the bombers, armored columns pushed deeper into enemy territory. Tank crews gripped their steering levers for 3 to 4 days without sleep. No halts. The engines never cooled. Synthetic stimulants fueled the relentless momentum of the state war effort. Foot soldiers followed the steel vanguard. They marched through dense timber and heavy mud. The invasion forces bypassed the boundaries of natural endurance. The state dictated a pace that ignored human physiology entirely. Infantry units carried heavy combat gear on a continuous march for 36 hours. 35 million pills for a single campaign. To secure those 36-hour marches, the war machine demanded uninterrupted chemical fuel. In the trenches, the stimulant wore innocent masks. Stuka-Tabletten, Panzer Schokolade. Tank drivers tore open ordinary candy wrappers right behind their transmission levers. They chewed the dark squares. The thick, sweet taste of cocoa completely masked the sharp, metallic bitterness of the synthetic drug. Where did 35 million doses come from? Behind this was planned state logistics. This was no random trench habit. It was a massive supply chain. The Wehrmacht deployed over 3 million men for the invasion of France. Sustaining their aggressive momentum required an infrastructure identical to the delivery of artillery shells and aviation fuel. Supply trucks hauled heavy wooden crates directly to the vanguard units. Quartermasters checked official ledgers. Officers distributed the blisters in strict order. Infantrymen swallowed the doses and marched 50 kilometers without a single halt. The state manufactured human stamina on factory lines. A German military doctor documented the definitive fact of the offensive. The true secret weapon was not the tank, but the pill. Behind the 35 million doses heading to the front lay cold bureaucracy. The High Command issued official directives. The military took control of the chemical formula in 1939. Officers ran clinical tests. The results dictated a new doctrine. People expect medicine to preserve health. The Reich demanded the opposite. Doctors systematically erased natural sleep and fear to forge living combat machines. Official medical journals of the Third Reich published the clinical findings, praising the chemical for unlocking an unprecedented willingness to take risks. Ink on paper transformed a reckless field experiment into a legitimate state norm. Commanders approved the formula for the entire army. The Temmler factory secured a massive state contract to scale up the output. Assembly lines ran without pause. By April 1940, the logistics network completed the preparation. Quartermasters successfully stockpiled 35 million pills for the upcoming Western campaign. The order took effect. The fuel for global slaughter began as an over-the-counter diet pill. Before the army weaponized the chemical in 1939, it had already conquered the civilian market. How did methamphetamine hydrochloride become an everyday norm? In 1937, pharmacists simply placed it on their counters. A Berlin housewife walks into a local pharmacy. She studies the clean glass display case. The pharmacist asks for no prescription. She points to a branded tube. Inside rest flawlessly white pills. Each bears a sharply stamped logo. They look exactly like harmless daily vitamins. The Berlin manufacturer, Temmler Work, named their creation Pervitin. They knew their audience perfectly. Print advertisements promised boundless energy. Posters guaranteed rapid weight loss for struggling housewives. They even infused Hildebrand box chocolates with the pure chemical to boost everyday sales. The public bought it instantly. This commercial boom served a hidden purpose. Open retail sales bypassed medical regulations. The civilian market became a massive, uncontrolled clinical trial. Millions of ordinary citizens tested the narcotic on their own nervous systems, laying the groundwork for a future military doctrine. Factory workers swallowed tablets to survive double shifts. Students used them to study through the night. The entire nation consumed the chemical without a second thought. Then, military analysts reviewed the staggering commercial sales data. The Wehrmacht claimed the formula,